Hi, welcome to Dev Diary number 1 for Served, a craft-specific hosting platform which I've been building over the last few months. There's quite a few features already in place, so I wanted to run those past you and see if you've got any other ideas and see what the general vibe is. So let's get going. The whole point in Served as a hosting service is to allow developers of Craft CMS websites to get from project to project live in as few steps as possible. And there's so many hurdles that can come up when you are provisioning your own servers, or even when you're using a service which provisions servers on your behalf, just because there's so many moving parts involved, especially when you start adding in additional functionality like SSL certificate provisioning and backups and security scanning, things like that. So by packaging all of those things up into a single reusable element that I can apply to multiple different craft projects means less effort for developers at the end of the day, because I take on some of the hard work and leave you to build awesome websites and get them live as quickly as possible. So we'll start at the beginning, the classic login screen. I'm going to create a brand new account. Currently, this service is invite only, hence the invite codes required. I'm hoping to get this publicly available at around the .all conference time, assuming everything goes to plan. So we create an account. First thing we're shown is create a project dialog. So the key thing you can pick up from this is that all projects are created via existing Git repos. So this is giving us the option at the moment to connect to either GitHub or GitLab in order to pull the code for your website into my system, into the hosting service, where it then gets packaged up and deployed. I'm going to connect using GitLab because I've got a few craft projects on there which I can demonstrate. This goes through an OAuth 2 flow with the external Git hosting service, so that I can essentially get access to the repos themselves. I've previously connected to GitLab, so it's just automatically allowed me to select that. Next, it will give me a list of all of the repos that have recently been edited inside my GitLab account. Let's choose one that in fact, let's go with my blog website. Once I've selected my personal website, it then gives me a list of recent commits. I'm probably going to change the interface around this to be a bit more intuitive. I don't really like the select box vibe that's going on there, but let's see what we get. So because we are connected to GitLab via OAuth, the system is able to pull the project from GitLab and see what's inside it. And by doing so, it's able to determine which folders inside the repo it thinks are related to Craft. And this is what this interface is allowing us to change. So essentially, it's telling us that inside the repo there are these directories all inside the source folder in this case. And it thinks that these folders are the ones that are related to Craft. So source/web is the web folder that Craft normally uses. Source config is Craft's config folder, and so on. Most of the time, this will detect all of Craft's files pretty well. It'll find them all. So you probably won't need to change anything here, but just in case you've got some weird setup inside your repo with folders all over the place, then you can make changes to them. And that is essentially it. Once you've done that, it will fire off a task in the background, which will take your project, build it into what I call a bundle. A bundle consists of the base software, so that's PHP and Nginx, along with your craft files. It will then go through a process of applying best practice security measures and tweaking Craft's config settings to make sure that everything's set up to work within the served hosting environment. Once that bundle is ready, it will deploy it to a cluster which I have set up, and that will essentially that will get your staging environment ready. So we'll just wait for this. This normally takes between 2 and 3 minutes, so we'll just skip ahead. And there we go. So the project has now been deployed to the cluster. There's a few checks that go on in the background to make sure that the project is able to talk to the database and to the caching Redis cluster that's been set up for the project. And it should be ready to go on this URL. So you'll notice that this URL has stage in its name. And this is because the staging environment is set up by default when a new project is loaded onto the platform. The production environment is only started when a plan has been selected for the project itself. So you can get the entire thing all running within staging and then only select a subscription plan for the project once you're happy that everything is going to work and everything is as you expect. So let's click the link and see what happens. So as expected, we hit the Craft site temporarily unavailable error page. That's because Craft isn't installed yet. We haven't loaded anything into the database, which has been set up for this project. The database is essentially empty. And so if we want to, we can do a Craft install to get things up and running. It's also worth noting that while the project was being created in the background, the platform also generated a valid Craft license and injected that into the project bundle while it was being built. And the reason that the license is generated while the project is being bundled and not using the normal Craft mechanism of generating it once someone logs into the CMS is because by default all of the projects within the served platform run in high availability mode. So there are potentially multiple copies of every single project that gets deployed. The benefits of high availability are many, and I'm not going to talk about them at this point. But because there are multiple different copies of the project, it means that the license file for the project has to be injected into the bundle so that the same license is applied to each individual instance of your project, rather than each instance generating its own license file, which would end badly. So you can see that Craft installed successfully. We've now just got an empty Craft install on our URL, but it will have all of the template files and any of the assets that are checked into the Git repo for my project. So if I go back to the staging URL, there's my blog with no content. So that was a success. Now if we go back to the serve dashboard, I'll run through a few of the different things that you can do with a project once it's within this environment. So the overview page, I'm still building some bits of this. The essential idea here is that you will have an overview of both your staging and production environment, see what state they're in. There'll be call to actions to tell you if you need to do something in particular, then they'll be displayed here. I also want to do uptime monitoring by default and also response time monitoring. So you'll get the average number of milliseconds that your responses from your project are taking. So you can see if there's any problems. Maybe you do a deployment and your response time goes through the roof, then you know that it might be worth rolling back until you've figured out why that's occurred. The different options at the top of the screen here, so source, bundles, environment, deployment, are set out in such a way that this will be the flow that you go through in order to go from Git repo to deployed. And if you want to make changes, then you'll go through in that order. So at the beginning, source is essentially the configuration of our Git repository. So in this case, it's just giving us a non-editable Git repo, which just tells us which repo it's pulling from. There's also an RSA deployment key, which you can use if you're setting up if you're manually connecting to a Git repo, so not GitHub or GitLab. Say you are hosting on a completely separate service, which I don't have OAuth access to, then you will be able to use deploy keys instead to pull the project down. And that's mostly set up. There's just a few edge cases that I need to fix before I actually put that live. You'll also notice that option is pretty much ready to go in the new project page. So here it's just grayed out for now, the manual repo connection setting. But I'm going to put that live before this gets rolled out to the majority of people. Also, in the source panel, you can see the directory mappings. So if your folder structure inside your repo changes for some reason, then you can update that here and get that saved. Once you've set up the source for your files, you then create bundles. So a bundle, as I mentioned earlier, is your code mixed with a PHP version, an Nginx version, to create a bundle, which can be deployed to the cluster. You can choose your PHP version and Nginx version just in case you need something specific for some reason. At the moment, you only have the option of choosing PHP 7.3 and Nginx 1.15. However, you'll notice there's a secondary version on these, and that's because I make changes to the base software that's installed, like adding modules, increasing, updating for security patches, things like that. So as I do those things, I'll be bumping my version number here, and then you can very easily take a commit that you have made and apply a different version of the base PHP install, for instance, to get PHP updated to the latest version without making any changes to your code base. Once you've selected your base software versions, you can pull in a list of recent commits, select which one you would like to include in your bundle, and then create a new bundle. And essentially, that will just fire off a task in the background and add it to your bundles list, which is here. Eventually, I want to automate this, so I'm going to have a webhook option so that you can fire off a request to the served platform whenever you push a commit to specific branches within your repo, and then that will fire off a rebundle using whatever the latest PHP and Nginx versions you've used on previous bundles, and then that will be ready to go without any manual intervention. So the next step, once you've created a bundle, is to define environment settings, which we do on the environment tab. Here you can just set environment variables, so they're just pretty bog standard. The only two that are in there at the moment are environment, which isn't editable, which just lets you know which environment you're currently running in, staging or production, and also a DB table prefix, which is used by Craft to prefix all of its table names. I'm sure you'll have come across it if you've made any Craft websites. You can change that as required. Maybe if you are uploading a database dump and you have a table prefix that's different from inside your dump, then you might want to change that before you upload the database dump to make sure it's all lined up. Yeah, you can also change the Craft security key. This auto-generates one on your behalf, but you can supply your own there if you fancy. And also, if you aren't happy using the license key that's auto-generated by the served platform, as I mentioned earlier, which is done during the initial project setup. You can supply your own just by pasting it in there, and that allows you to take a license from an existing hosting environment and drop it into here without having to edit any of the files within a bundle, because you probably don't have your license key checked into your Git repo. If you do have your license key checked into your Git repo, that's okay too. It will use the one that's in your Git repo unless you override it with one that is set here. Once you've got that far, you can move on to deployment. So the bundles that we built previously are all available to be deployed to our staging and production environments. Here I have a staging environment enabled because I haven't selected a subscription plan yet, so I can't deploy a bundle to production yet. All of the bundles that I've built will show up here. This is another place where I probably will change the user interface. I've used select boxes a lot in places where they don't necessarily work particularly well for the use case, so a lot of this might change, but it will just be at a UX level. You can select a bundle that you want to deploy to staging, select a bundle you want to deploy to production, and then save those settings. You can also tweak some deployment settings. I'll probably add more to this list as I go on. Auto deploy new bundles to staging is an interesting one. So that would allow any bundles that are created within the bundles screen or via the webhook would auto deploy to staging once the bundle has been built. The second option here is to run migrations and project config updates automatically once a new bundle has been deployed. That's really useful because essentially it eliminates any downtime from if for instance one bundle is running Craft 3.1.3 and the next bundle that's deployed is running Craft 3.2, then ticking that box will make sure that the database is upgraded and any project config updates are automatically applied as soon as the new bundle hits the platform. So as long as that doesn't take ages to run, you should have zero downtime deployment, even with significant Craft updates. When you make changes to all of these settings, say if I untick these, so that didn't do what I wanted it to, maybe change that. So now that I've changed those settings, rather than push that immediately to the hosting environment, it will wait for you to make as many changes as you want to make, and then you can click the deploy now button. When you hit that button, that's when those changes will actually be committed to the hosting environment. So essentially, if you're making several changes and you want to deploy them all in one go, you have the option to do that. These changes aren't applied one at a time as you make them, and that means that things can be planned a bit easier. And also it means that if you accidentally select or unselect an option that you didn't mean to, that isn't just going to take down your site immediately. You can check through everything before you commit to deploying to the actual hosting environment. So using these options, we can essentially take a Git repo, we can bundle it with the right PHP and Nginx versions, we can set up the environment in which all that code is going to run, and we can deploy it with zero downtime deployments to our hosting environment. The next thing we need to do is actually get traffic pointed towards that project, and you can do that via the domains page. This is pretty straightforward. You can connect a domain name to the service, and it will give you instructions for how that domain needs to be set up. In other words, which DNS records need creating in order to point the domain name towards the served environment. You then have the option to verify that domain. So I'll add my domain. It's already been taken by another test project that I have set up. So let's add this one instead. That's now added in an unverified state. So currently this won't impact the hosting at all. It just won't work until it's been verified. When you click verify, there's a process that goes off in the background which checks the DNS records to make sure that they are configured correctly. So if I click this, it will give me an error because I haven't set up the DNS records for test5.macgraysok.com. Let's try that. There we go. It's telling me that I need an A record set to the correct IP address. These error messages are going to be part of like an FAQ underneath the connected domain section on this screen eventually, once I've written it all. So you'll get told what to do before you end up clicking on that verify button. The verification grays out for 15 minutes once you've actually performed a verification test. That's just to stop people from DNS check spamming using my service. If the DNS records are set up appropriately, then this gets a nice little green verified badge. And at that point, the SSL certificates for this domain will be generated and attached to the project. And also any traffic which is intended for this domain will be routed to your project inside the hosting cluster. So there's a bit of work still needs to be done around this, around education and making things look a bit prettier, but essentially it's all there, it's all working. Once you've got traffic coming into your project, you're probably going to want to look at logs. So I've implemented a log aggregation service that runs in the background of your project. You don't need to make any changes to your project at all to get this working. That's all done when the bundle is being created. I do that for you. And this will collect the logs from all of the different elements of your project. So we've got logs coming from Nginx, we've got logs coming from a background queue runner, we've got logs coming from the main PHP executor, and I need to tweak the max children for my PHP container by the look of it because it's hit the limit for that. I'll bump that up. You can get error messages. So here, when Craft was trying to do a database update, it hit this releasing a save point error, which doesn't seem to have broken anything, but it has logged it as an error, so you can see that there. And I need to make some improvements to this to allow you to go back in time or find logs for specific time periods. There's also free text search, so I can search for error, for instance, and it will filter that down for me, as you can see. So still lots of improvements for this log interface, but you can see that that's kind of, it's already implemented. Rather than having to log into a server, find the right files, and then use either download the log file to your local system and analyzing them there, or trying to use CLI commands to tail the end of log files, you can just do it all through the user interface. You can also interact with the database which is behind your project. The main function that I have implemented thus far is being able to import database dumps. So you can just grab a database dump from your project and different hosting environment or from your local environment and upload it. You can choose which environment that goes into, staging or production. And you also have the option to erase everything before the import takes place. That's pretty self-explanatory. Then we also have the backups section. So depending on which plan your project is subscribed to, the backups will occur at different intervals. A backup will take a snapshot of the database and it will store that for 30 days, after which it's automatically deleted. You will be able to roll back your project to any of those database snapshots, which are taken either hourly or daily, depending on your plan that you have selected. And you will also be able to download these database backups. And although I've not built it yet, one feature that I do want to implement is being able to use these backups to copy a project state from one environment to another. So you'll be able to take a backup from staging on a certain time and push that directly into the production database. And another nice thing I want to do is also link that to assets. So when you restore a database dump from 2 days ago, I will give you the option to also roll back your changes to any assets within Craft to match that database snapshot time, which means that you don't get that horrible situation where you have assets within the Craft assets database table which don't exist within the actual assets storage system, and you end up with broken images all over the place. So still got a fair amount of work to do around that, but that's what I'm heading towards, essentially being able to do like point in time rollbacks for the database and asset storage. Finally, on this list of options, you have the plan. So these are not set in stone in terms of the actual limitations that are applied to these plans. But all of the functionality for actually purchasing and renewing these plans is all done. You can upgrade your plan mid-cycle. You can downgrade at the end of a cycle. You can swap from monthly to yearly and things like that. That's all baked in already. And then obviously being able to edit billing settings and things like that. That's all in here. So it's worth mentioning at this point that billing is all currently based around teams. So you can have a team. A team can contain multiple projects and also have multiple users who are allowed to interact with the projects within that team. And the team's billing settings are used to pay for all of the projects within that team. What this will allow you to do is, if you want to pay for a project yourself, then you can have your team and the project can live within your team. But if you want your client to pay for a particular project, then you will be able to get them to create a team. They will then be able to invite you to their team and you can create the project inside their team and they will be able to manage all the billing settings separate from the access that you have, essentially. So they will be able to create a team, add billing, and then you can do all the project specific stuff that they don't need to worry about. And then obviously they will be able to invite other developers to their team as well, so they can easily move access to the project around different developers if they have different freelancers coming in and out and things like that. So that's essentially where I'm up to at the moment. The user management things I still need to build, but the idea is there, the skeleton is there to achieve that. I currently have a form that you can fill in on served.host to apply for access to the private beta. It'd be great if you could fill that in if you're interested in trying this out over the next few weeks. I'm going to be rolling this out really slowly because I want to personally onboard everyone that does start using it, just to get just to make sure that everyone's on the right page in terms of what this can do, what it will do, and what the end goals are, to make sure that it's going to work for whoever starts using it, and also to make sure that I'm getting feedback from people directly rather than just allowing people to go nuts on the platform and me not really knowing who's causing different errors that might be being found and things like that. So yeah, if you're interested, go and fill in the private beta sign up form on served.host, and hopefully we'll get this rolled out for general availability over the next couple of months. I'm going to be doing these dev diaries quite regularly, hopefully, in the run up to that and afterwards as well. So I will talk about the things that are currently in development, the things that I have, the progress that I've made each week, and then I can get feedback in kind of pseudo real time and move towards a platform that is as beneficial as possible for Craft CMS developers and for clients and for end users. So I hope you've enjoyed that run through of everything, and I'll catch you next time.